Good afternoon and welcome to the third Power Hour series event of 2023, a new suite of bite-sized sessions covering critical leadership topics. My name is Dave McGee and I'm the Managing Director here at Irish Times Training, and I have the easy job of being your host today. This year we've covered a number of power skills covering change management and coaching, and today we'll delve into the critical area of communication. And communication is the backbone of leadership. It's how leaders convey their vision, set expectations, and motivate their team to succeed. Yet communication goes beyond just sharing information. It's about understanding your audience and delivering your message in a way that resonates with them. I'm delighted to have our expert thought leader in this space with us today, Jill Tuite. Jill is an executive and life coach with over 25 years experience working in both middle and senior leadership roles in the field of leadership and development. So before I hand over to Jill, just some housekeeping. This session will be recorded. We will have some time at the end for some Q&A, and you can use the functionality on Zoom for questions to post questions. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Jill.
Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for the lovely, kind words, Dave. So first of all, I want to welcome you all here today. And I want to start off by perhaps just pressing the pause button and getting you to think and reflect about communication in a whole different perspective than you ever did before. Personally, I can't express the importance of communication as Dave has touched on. And it's so important, in fact, that some of the universities in this country are actually rewriting and introducing modules on these power skills. They call them transversal skills, because what's showing up is when they have graduates that come in with their partner industries, what's showing up is academically, they could be fantastic. They might have got a 2-1 or 1-1, but what's showing up is that they're missing this part. They're missing these power skills. So in order to be able to successfully and have a very high return on what they're doing in their role, they're not able to do it because they don't have this power, this area of communication, for example, and all of the other ones that have been mentioned previously before. So without any further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the next 25 to 30 minutes walking you through and giving you a little bit of a taster of what we actually cover on the Communicating with Confidence program or workshop that we have at the moment. It's really a deep dive. It's a very different way of looking at communication. So I just want you to bear that in mind. So as we all know, I suppose, if we're not effectively communicating, the detrimental effect that can have within the workplace. It's one of the top challenges that we have in today's workplace, and one of the core foundations in leadership. So if we look at how that is positively going to affect, if we introduce communication effectively with authenticity, how is that going to look, and what's the positive impacts? What are the wins that you are going to experience in the workplace? Well, if we start off at number one, and this is what we are all striving for in the workplace, and that's increased employee engagement with our stakeholders. So a lot of research has been done on this, and in actual fact, up to 95% of employees have cited that good communication contributes to their overall job satisfaction. The second thing is, and I see this a lot, if we don't have effective or strong communication skills, we're not going to have the ability to deal and to resolve conflict successfully. So this is something that comes up probably on a daily basis. It doesn't have to be a huge area of conflict, but it could be something like that you're coming across like a challenging situation. So again, moving on, we have trust, for fostering trust in teams. Trust, we're hearing trust everywhere. Podcasts, blogs, trust is everywhere and everything, intrinsically and extrinsically in leadership development, without a doubt. If we are not able to communicate authentically and in a trustful manner, we are absolutely not going to be able to develop and grow our teams, not able to get them to collaborate together, to work on those goals and have those successful outcomes and wins that we all need to grow our business. Finally, the other area is it also helps to create a very healthy, I suppose, workplace culture. Now, if we take a moment to think what's happening at the moment, there's lots of things happening at the moment. I mean, we're out of now of COVID. We have the great resignation going on at the moment. I'm not sure whether it had still stopped, but I think in some sectors it's still there. The other thing that's happening is that we have this silent resignation. So if we want to attract top talent and candidates, if we want to continue to retain those individuals, what we do need to do is to create a culture in our organization of authentic and effective communication. So let's move on and let's look at the umbrella, let's just say, of communication, because within communication, we have the different areas or different elements. So the first one is the verbal, how we converse, okay? Then we move on about, we talk about the non-verbal. So how is our body speaking? How are we speaking to each other with our non-verbal, with our body language, for example? The other thing is written, okay? So our written, how are we good at emails? How are we good at reporting? How are we good at communicating in that way? And finally, we have the area of listening, which is a whole different and very, very important element of effective communication. So you might be an individual that is absolutely fantastic at writing emails. You're very pointed, you've great clarity, you can really, I suppose, hammer or get the point taken across with your emails, with your writing. However, you may be the type of individual who goes into a team meeting and who can't control themselves and your emotions and keep interrupting at meetings. So you see, we need this, I suppose, collective mixture of communications in order to be successful and to be effective when we are communicating. So let's have a look further at how all that happens. So when we are communicating, we are going to choose a particular channel on how we're actually going to communicate through. So it could be a very personal message or it could be an impersonal message. So there's a couple of things that we need to check in on before we decide to choose that channel. Now, Shannon and Weaver, that's the Shannon and Weaver model, that was actually developed in the 1940s, and it was originally a mathematic module, which was since then converted into a communications model. So how we communicate. So Shannon and Weaver came up with this model that started off explaining that we have a sender that sends a message that goes through a channel and that's processed and decoded. And then we have a receiver, which is like an encoder. So we have to think before we even start and decide what the message is, what channel we're going to send it through. So number one thing we do if we touch on it is we need to identify the message. So what is the message that you need to send through? So if you have a team of people and they are being updated on your new procedure, a new policy or procedure, for example, something to do with annual leave that's going to have a kind of a heavy impact on them, okay? Are you going to send that out just on a generic email, or are you going to bring them in and have a group, I suppose, conversation with them and, a group meeting with them? What's the best, I suppose, way for that message to land? The other thing is, obviously, is that you need to look at what's happening and what type of culture you have within the organization with regards to communication. Now, we're here today because we are absolutely hoping and working to elevate our communication to one of authenticity and one of effectiveness. So that's why we're here today. So I want you to bear that in mind. The other thing is we need to, I suppose, choose the message for the audience. So check out the audience, what type of message would land for them best. When we send a message, we think that the message is going to land and be, I suppose, processed and understood by the receiver. But that always doesn't happen. So I might decide to send an email that somebody deems is going to be a very high value or importance to them. And because, for example, I might have sent an email, it's not going to have the same impact. And there could be noise that it interrupts with how that message actually lands with the individual. So I just want you to pause for a moment and think, what type of channels are you presently using in your communication in-house? Now, I'm just going to spend a couple of slides looking and talking about verbal communication. So I can't stress enough, and I see this a lot in the workplace, how we show up, how we communicate is absolutely going to determine the response that we get. I want to take a moment and tap into the neuroscience behind this. So basically, when we are in contact with people, we are actually open, what is known as open loop systems. So with neuroscience, conversations have the ability to actually trigger changes in our brains. I just want you to hold that thought for a moment. Trigger changes. This is how powerful conversations are. Now, those conversations, if they're effective, especially, have the ability to boost and change our brain by basically boosting the release of hormones and neurotransmitters. What's happening as a result of that is that the chemistry in our body actually changes. Now, our brain, a very historic one, as probably many of you might know this, was wired to basically, without us even realizing, tap into trusting and distrusting situations. So that's happening all of the time with our brains that we don't even realize. So if we're in a one-to-one with an individual, with a stakeholder or somebody from the organization, we're having a meeting and we are showing up and displaying authentic, effective communication skills and abilities, we are actually, believe it or not, helping to trigger the release of, for example, when it comes to trust, because they're beginning to feel safe psychological, they're beginning to open up, they're getting that vibe from you. So what's happening there is that they are unlocking, or we are triggering the release of the hormone of oxytocin. So trust, as I said earlier on, is the big word in leadership development at the moment, and should be, and is fundamental on the success and everything that we do. So on the other hand, if we are showing up and we're not displaying effective, authentic communication, and the recipient is sitting opposite you, and you're not articulating, I suppose, clearly, your body language is very closed, it's very shut, they will then begin to retreat, because what's happening is we are infecting them with and triggering the release, because they're beginning to feel anxious, a little bit anxious, and perhaps going into a threat state, the hormone of cortisol. Okay, so with that, when that happens, they're actually going to retreat, they're going to shut down, and that is the end of the engagement with them. So I want you to take away that point. You have the ability to either positively infect or negatively rather infect another person. The other thing before I move on from this slide, which is an amazing fact, I'm not sure whether you know it, but human beings, us as human beings, have the ability to influence another human being's central nervous system if we are in close proximity to them. So I want you to think of a time, just for a moment, that you walk into a room, nobody has actually even said anything, and you're getting a vibe, probably you're reading into the body language that things aren't great, okay? And that is actually affecting your nervous system. And I'm not going to run down a rabbit hole about that one, but as you know, we have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, and we always want to be in the parasympathetic. So there's a lot going on with verbal communication. So let's think about what we need to do if we are confronted with a very challenging situation or conversation. We feel that conflict is around the corner. So what happens to us? What happens to the respondent? So just tap into how the brain works again. We have what's known as a limbic system. It's the oldest part of the brain, part of the prehistoric brain, that has evolved obviously into the prefrontal cortex, which is our executive brain. You might have heard people talking about. That's where we do all our thinking, consciousness, we're there, problem solving, decision making, etc. So focusness is in the front. But really, we operate on pilot with this limbic system. So the limbic system is quite intricate. There's a couple of things in there. It's responsible for how we behave and our emotional responses. The other thing you'll find in there is the hippocampus, where it's like our memory bank, where we can store experiences, where we can kind of retrieve information when we need to do it. So another part of the limbic system is a thing called the amygdala. Okay, and this is like a little zoner that sits in there, and they are unconsciously, subconsciously, you're not even aware of it, but they're basically tapping in to see if there's any threatening or fearful stimuli happening. Okay, so if you are thrown into an absolute threat state with lots of cortisol in your system, what can happen to your amygdala is that you can get into such a state, okay, that it's hijacked, and that you could end up having a conversation that you can't even remember. So think of a time back. It could have happened this morning or something when you lost it, maybe with somebody in the house, or I'm hoping you haven't lost it in the workplace. But think of a time when that's happened, or it has happened in the past, and you say to yourself, my goodness, what has happened there? I can't believe I said that. Oh my goodness, what was I thinking of? That's an amygdala hijack. So we do not want that happening during conflicting situations or challenging situations. So I want to really just go through a couple of slides on how we can navigate and use and articulate our verbal communication when we are trying to, I suppose, converse with other individuals. So there's a couple of words that we should use, or could use rather, and are not suitable for using. So one of them is an I statement. So if you're having a conversation with a stakeholder and you come across something that you're not very happy about, rather than saying I noticed that you did this, or you did that, or you appear to be whatever, if you use I know I instead. So what I could see from that situation, when we use that type of language, what's happening is we are, I suppose, conveying respect to the stakeholder or the individual. We're helping to reduce the conflict, kind of diffuse it slightly. And then we are opening, and we're actually being more persuasive when we use that. Another one that we can use, which is quite common, is the yes and. This is a wonderful one. So when we use yes and, we're actually hopping into the space of a growing mindset. We do not want to use words like no and but. Just think of the word but. But is a very, very short word, but a powerful word. The minute you say but to somebody in a conversation, they're straight away going to start retrieving. They're going to say to themselves, okay, this conversation is finishing up now. It's closing off. That person has made their mind up. So what's the point of me engaging further? Okay. So if we use words like yes and, it means that we are being more collaborative. We are being more open. We are indicating that we are listening and actively listening to what the individual is saying. It also helps. This is a brilliant one to have actually in team dynamic. If we're having, a team meeting, or if you're trying to come up with resolutions or being creative, rather than allowing that conflict to kind of happen, you can use this yes and. Finally, this is a fantastic one. And if you really, really want to dig deep, this is called situation behavior impact. So this is really when we, I suppose, get the onion and we start taking away the layers. So I suppose with the situation behavior impact, it's like a meta view, and we're able to kind of look in and see and close the gap between what was intended, what was the original intent of the message, and what was the impact of the message, and then to go back and explore the intent. Why is this so popular? I think this is a fantastic tool, to be quite honest, because first of all, if you're the one that is actually giving the feedback and you're feeling a little bit anxious and a little bit worried about it, it allows you to feel less anxious when you're giving the feedback because of the way it's actually structured. So let's have a look further and see how it works. So again, you're going to describe the situation to the individual. You're going to be very specific. So let's just say that you had a team meeting this morning at 10:30. So this morning at the team meeting at 10:30, you're going to acknowledge what happened with the behavior. Now you have to keep for the facts. You can't get emotional. You can't get this personal. So at the meeting at 10:30 this morning, I noticed that you interrupted when I was, I suppose, sharing the recent stats and what was happening with the project that we need to get in by the 25th of this month. Impact. Then you're going to move on. You're going to talk about the impact. So what impact did that interruption have on you? So when you interrupted me like this, to be honest, I felt very frustrated because it actually threw off my thought process, and it took me a little bit to gravel back up. And then you're going to look at the intent and you ask them, like, what was going on there? What was coming up for you? So you're opening the floor to the individual. You're step by step going, you're describing the situation. You're not letting it get personal with them, with you. You're looking and you're exploring the behavior. And then, of course, the impact the behavior has had on you and the team or whatever. And then this is the lovely bit at the end. It's point number 4. It's the intent. You're exploring that because they could turn around and say to you, well, actually, I was just really enthusiastic because the team, they had all their KPIs in time. And so they may not have intended to be rude or intended for you to get off your thought process, but at the same time, you're able to discuss it further. So they're just some of the tools, some of the tips that we can use when we're dealing with challenging situations. Now, I'm really going to ask you to press that pause button at the moment. And we are going to do a deep dive on how we can elevate our own personal communication and how we can show up and effectively with our communication and be more authentic. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at this. So I want to move on to verbal communication. I really can't stress the importance of verbal communication. I want to let you know, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this or not, but when you walk into a room, you have 7 seconds to make an impression on somebody, just 7. You don't even have to open your mouth. You don't even have to say anything, but 7 seconds, you have actually made an impression on somebody. Now, let's just say you start conversing. If you look at the breakdown, and this is a Merhaba communication model here, on non-verbal communication rather. 7, only 7. It's incredible. When I show this to learners, they're actually their mouths they hit to the ground. They can't believe it. 7% of what you were saying verbally. Okay, only 7% of the words. That's the message. The other percent is how you are showing up. So 55% of the message is on your body or non-body language, non-verbal communication rather. So how are you showing up with your expressions on your face? What about your eye contact? What about the way you're standing? Are you frowning? And then the other 38% accumulates to your voice, your tone, your pauses, all of those aspects of it. So non-verbal communication is absolutely huge. So a lot of us aren't aware of the impact that we are having on others when we show up verbally. So let's just have a look and see what happens. So I walk into the room. I don't even say anything before I even introduce myself, how I'm standing, okay, and positioning myself and what I'm doing with my body. We look at that in a moment. Your mind is in that, it's subconsciously, without you even realizing, you are going into this process called decoding. So you're looking for signals that I'm sending you, okay, without you even trying. Now, we're very, very good at doing that because we can judge people very, very quickly from their nonverbal communication or their body language. And they might be a fantastic person, a very, warm, articulate person, but they're not in sync to that because of how they're showing up with their body language. Now, the other thing that we're not so great of is this encoding processing, where we're not aware of the signals that we are sending to other people. So I want you to think about that one. How is your decoding? Probably quite strong. Your encoding, maybe not so strong. So again, just to touch point on that, us as human beings, without us even making an effort, are subconsciously picking up on body language, non-verbal cues, and other cues around us. Now, people say to me, gosh, I don't feel very confident with my communication. So what about starting off your confidence journey with showing up with strong body language? Because if we show up with strong body language, we are actually, I suppose, sending a story to somebody that we have, we're very approachable and that we're very knowledgeable, although we might be those things, and we mightn't be too approachable, but because of the way we're standing, they're deeming it as being approachable. Now, you've all probably heard of Amy Cuddy, who is a social psychologist. She's quite famous. She's an American lady that wrote loads of books with power posing. So when we stand straight and tall, we actually have the ability to trigger the release of testosterone, okay? And it actually does give us, we feel more confidence. And there's been a lot of research done on this, where I think a group of 75 people were asked to pose, half of them to pose in a power pose, half of them not to pose for 5 minutes. And they all went off and they had an interview. And stats showed, research proved that those who held and participated in the power posing actually performed better at the interview. So this is something that is actually, and the power of it is actually happening today. So let's dig a little deeper and let's look at our body language. I often say to people, very simple things, smiling. Are you smiling? When we smile, we actually open the energy around us. People deem us to be, more approachable, more trusting. What about our open gestures? So when we say open gestures, are we sitting with our arms folded all the time? Are we covering our mouth when we talk? How interested are we appearing when we're actually talking to somebody? So for example, are we looking away when we're, are we frowning? Are we being attentive? Are we being present? What about our eye contact? This is a big one. This is a huge one with eye contact. Are we looking away? Are we, making moderate eye contact with whoever we're meeting with? What about our hands? Are we gesticulating too much? Are we doing it at a moderate rate? What about the volume, the pitch, the pace of how we're speaking? So all of these things make up what's known as positive body language. And this is where we need to get to work, guys, and work in our encoding and start becoming aware, because we may not be aware of these elements of our body language. So just to share with you, for example, I'm pretty in tune with my body language because of what I do. But for example, when I'm concentrating, my last organization that I worked, when I'm concentrating, and if I'm concentrating on something on the laptop, I have a tendency to frown. And so when people walked by, they'd say to me, Jill, what's wrong? What's up? Are you in bad form? Did something happen? In actual fact, I was in great form, but I wasn't encoding. I wasn't being aware, and I didn't have to be aware. But it's just to take that into consideration. Is your verbal communication, is the message that you're saying, is it in sync with your non-verbal communication? Something to think about. Let's have a look. It's the opposite to positive body language. So when we look at that, we can look at avoiding eye contact. I see this a lot. People looking away, people looking down. I know it's a confidence thing. Crossing the arms, crossing the legs. People feel, that you're not going to be approachable. They're not going to approach you. Negative facial, pouting, frowning, scratching your head. Invading, being too close to somebody, invading their space. A lot of people, that's not comfortable. Fidgeting, so you could have a pen and you're fidgeting like that, or you might have your mobile phone and you're flicking through it. Talking too fast is one, when you're rabbiting on at like 135 miles an hour. or a weak handshake. Now, this is a really, really important one because research has shown that if you partake in a strong palm-to-palm handshake with somebody, the rapport that is built up in those few seconds is equivalent to spending 3 hours on a one-to-one basis with that person. So that's how strong this body language is. It's fascinating, in my opinion. The other thing that I want to check in on is to highlight that verbal communication is actually a two-way street. Remember, so it's not just about talking. The other huge element of verbal communication is a thing called listening. So how good are you at your listening skills right now? So let's have a little look and see, and let's explore the different levels of listening, because people can fall really down heavily on their listening skills. They might be great at the verbal communication, great at the written communication, but not so good at this listening bit of the communication. So we have three types of listening, all relate to active listening. So the first level is what we call internal listening. So you're having a conversation with me, I'm listening to you, you're telling me stories, something that happened, I don't know, in the Teams meeting that morning. So what's happening there is that I'm actually start listening to myself. So I switch off and I start thinking about, well, what happened with me last week at the same Teams meeting? What happened there? And then I start forming judgments, and then my mind is going off wandering. And then I think about something that's actually happened 2.5 years ago in another department. So I'm gone, I've switched off. Level 2 is a more focused type of listening, where I'm having a conversation with you. Okay, and I'm listening to what you're saying. The other thing I'm doing is, however, I'm looking at your body cues. I'm looking at your body language. So you're telling me that everything's good, Jill, we're on target. You've had no issues with any departments in, getting transfer of information or whatever over for the project that you're working on. However, your body, your tone is telling a different story. So I'm all the time processing that and figuring out, well, there's something else going on here. And that's what moves us very nicely over to the level 3, which is the global listening, power of listening. This is a fantastic platform to be at. It does take a lot of work and dedication. So what's happening here is we're having a conversation. I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm also looking at your body cues, your body language. I see there's something out of sync. And then I'm really listening to what is being said, the other things that are not being said. So for example, I noticed you haven't said that you didn't get the updated information from the accounts department that you were told you would get, because I know from a previous conversation and so forth. So that's the heightened level, the top. And I strive, to be honest with you, on a daily basis when I work with all of my learners and clients, to absolutely tap into that level 3, that global listening. Now, you have to ask yourself, that's fine. I know the 1, 2, 3 levels. How can I try to elevate my listening skills into them being more active? Well, the first thing that we can do is really listen and be present. Pay attention to what's being said. Stop fidgeting. Okay. Switch off your phone. Put a do not disturb. Have an area where you have a bit of privacy. Switch off from any distractions, etc. Stop making judgments while the person is telling you what's going on, okay? Let go of any unconscious biases that you might have. Take a moment then to reflect and think, okay, right, I'm not going to take this personal. I'm going to leave it with an open mind. I'm going to try and be objective. Clarify with the individual what you have just heard and summarize. The other thing is then we finish off by just sharing. So what I've heard is, etc., etc. And within this active listening, we can actually use very powerful conversations, which will help us with this whole suite of active listening as well. Now, we started off, because I'm conscious of time, of saying that we want and we're striving to communicate as an authentic individually. So how do we do that? How do we come across that we are actually communicating authentically? Communicating authentically means creating a very deep connection with your stakeholders. It means tapping into your honesty all of the time in everything that you're communicating. You know, are you going to follow your values and follow the one of integrity? Are you going to walk your talk with what you're saying? How are you with your empathy? Are you able to put yourself into the other individual's shoes and look at it from their perspective? What about your self-awareness? Are you aware of your own behaviors and skills? So this is just kind of a snapshot of how we can start building and elevating and communicating with authenticity. One of the things I always asked people to ask themselves when I deliver this program is, what story exactly are you telling yourself? And I'm going to take a moment just to get you to think about that one. Because if we keep telling ourselves the same story, nothing is going to change. So if you're a person who wants to come across perceived as being a more confident communicator, and you keep telling yourself, well, I'm not a confident person, I'm never going to be able to do it, I wouldn't be able to do it, that's way above my head space to get there, that's exactly what's going to happen. So what happens is, just to tell you, it kind of becomes like a washing machine. A thought comes into our head. We've lots and lots and lots of thoughts. In actual fact, we can have 60,000 thoughts. Can you believe that? A day comes into our mind. 60,000. 90% of them are reoccurring thoughts, and about 85% of them aren't true at all. So we have a thought. Okay, so what happens with the thought? It lasts for 5 seconds. That then is converted into an emotion or feeling, and that lasts for 90 seconds only. Now, that emotion and feeling is going to absolutely impact the way you're going to behave. So if you were telling yourself with this thought, feeling, and behavior, you are going round and round and round in circles, going nowhere, because you keep telling yourself the same story. So let's try and get out of our own way, and let's try and create a different story that I am possible, I can make these changes. So just before we finish off, a couple of pointers that we can work on to develop self-awareness, which is a really, really important element, especially if you are in the role of leadership or leadership development. Check in on these 5 things. First of all, ask yourself, what about the space and time you're creating for yourself? Is that happening? Are you having some alone time? Now, obviously, everybody has very, very busy lives, very fast paced. It's not possible to disappear for 2 hours during the day. But say, for example, when you're finished work or whatever, are you getting that 10-minute break just to perhaps switch off, sit outside? I don't know, if you can, go for a walk, something short, or just listen to some nice relaxing music. That switch off time is very, very important. What about our devices? Are we going, how is our sleep hygiene at the moment? Do we find ourselves in bed whizzing through what's happening on Instagram or LinkedIn before we lay our head on the pillow? So create space and time. Second thing we can do is practice listening. And this is this active listening. So I'm going to, I suppose, challenge yourself, okay? The next time you're having a conversation, you're in a meeting or something, be present, actively listen, look at the body cues, listen to what is being said. And if you find yourself in a situation because perhaps you just feel very passionate about something, stop and hold it and try to tame those impulse controls, as I call them. I've had to work very hard on this on myself, because I can interrupt people without realizing it, only because of my passion, for example, or because I feel so inspired about something. So that's a really, really, really good tool to use. The other thing is to practice mindfulness. So what about trying to, I suppose, having a moment where we can just switch off totally, just maybe rather than trying to do 22 things at a time, guess what? We're only just going to do one thing at a time and just concentrate and focus on and try and empty your mind. The other thing we can do, just to finish off, is journal your awareness. So this is a great tool because, especially for somebody when they want to build their confidence in some way, For every day, you write down 3 wins of the day, 3 things that you did. So for example, I attended a meeting, team meeting today, and I managed not to interrupt. Or I attended a meeting today and I was more conscious of my body language. Okay, so that works fantastic. I've done that one myself as well. The other final thing is, what about gaining a different perspective on things? Do you have, a suite of people that you can check in with? Do you have an honest, trustworthy individual, if you're not gifted to attend one of these courses, that you can check with and say, how do you think I come across? Or do you think sometimes I come across as negative? Or so gaining a different perspective. So look, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. There's huge amount of information there, I know. And I'd like you to walk away and perhaps challenge yourself in just one of those things, because if we start with one of them, we can build and make incredible things happen with our communication. So thank you. And I'm going to hand you over now to Dave for the question and answers.
Thanks a million, Jill, for that session. And look, yeah, I think coming away again, we've alluded at the start, it's a bite-sized condensed version of the 2-day program, but I think it gives people a sense of the power of communication and effective communication. And you're going through the areas of verbal, non-verbal communication. The listening piece is really important. I think that is something that most of us can do better. I think there's some statistics saying people who are listening to someone for 10 minutes only take in about a quarter of the messages. So there's definitely areas people can improve there. And the authentic communication as well, especially where, empathy is a key thing in leadership traits today. 60,000 thoughts today. I thought it'd be more like 600,000, to be honest. Maybe that's my world I'm living in. But yeah, I think there's lots to take in there, and lots of tools and frameworks to take away, which is what we're all about here in supporting individuals and organizations and what they do. So we've got a number of questions that have come through, and I'm going to kick off with one from Tanya to start with, which is really good. I think the culture communication is an area that people need to be aware of. We talk about personality styles and adapting to different personality styles in communication, but I think the cultural side of things is something as well. So Tanya's asked, are these communication norms standard in all cultures, or do you find it varies across nationalities?
Yes, absolutely. And brilliant question, Tanya. Absolutely. We have to be aware of our audience, and we do have to be aware of the culture of who we're communicating with. So for example, in some cultures, for example, I know in a lot of Asian cultures, that if you maintain eye contact, that could actually be perceived as being disrespectful. So absolutely, if you have a collective mixture of audiences, you do have to be mindful of aspects of that, particularly with the eye contact, etc.
Yeah, I think there's nuances in different cultures, etc. Another question here is around people are good at communicating normally, so one-to-one or within a room, but when it comes to public speaking, people's voice will quiver, etc. And is this something that's common, or is there anything that you can give any hints and tips around?
Well, there's a fantastic course we also do on presentation skills, where we dig deep and do a deep dive and how we can do that. But absolutely. So for me, presentation, I mean, I've worked with people on one-to-ones who basically, they were getting ill, I'll be honest with you, in the bathroom with anxiety and nerves, and just totally ran away from doing it, to be transformed after we put the steps into place, into action, to being able to be attentive, deliver with a very successful result. So some of the things that we can do there are steps with that. One of the big things I always recommend to people once we go through the process is to practice. So preparation is key. One of the things that you can do is that you can video yourself, or you can record yourself before a presentation. Okay. You can also re-regulate your nervous system by doing, for example, things like box breathing that can calm and, get rid of that cortisol, adrenaline, and let some oxytocin kind of come in as well. But there's a lot in that. It's a very, very common, and it's a great question as well, but you can actually do a 360. Absolutely, and be successful with your presentation. And it's very normal, because all kinds of things chemically can happen with us. We get dry mouth, sweaty palms, So there's lots of different techniques that we can do to make that happen. And as I said, I've met so many people who have successfully done it. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, okay. Just another one, and again, we are delivering this as a webinar, so it is through Zoom, but and again, it's back to the non-verbal communication. So what do you think is the impact on non-verbal communication of regularly using Zoom Teams for meetings? So when it's not possible to see body movements, etc. So does the importance fall on the words more than anything?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, where will I even start with Microsoft Teams and Zoom? You are actually you're arriving into a different planet, guys, when you're trying to do a meeting on Zoom or a Teams. And I find that you really have to elevate everything. So you can see me here today. So I'm, how am I looking into the camera? Am I interacting with all the participants? Have I set the scene with my communication? How is my tone? How is my face, my facial expressions? How, fast or slow is my pace of how I'm talking? There's a lot going on. It is definitely more challenging, everybody, to participate in a Teams or Zoom meeting. But with good practice and with good habits you built up, you can absolutely be very successful and have effective communication. But great question, and a very relevant one in the world we're living in at the moment.
Okay. Another question is around, so a lot of people on the Zoom have probably transitioned to a new role or transitioning potentially.
Okay.
And what advice do you give them in communicating with colleagues or former colleagues? There's a different dynamic now come into play.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of people that I work with on leadership development programs are actually in the role of leadership, and they've just transitioned over to it. And one of the very common questions they say is, oh, do I have to now behave or communicate differently now because, I'm senior to them or whatever? Well, the answer is no. The answer is yes, though, on the other hand, that you're going to have to tap into all of those techniques and skills that you've just listened to. You have to, without a doubt, spend a lot of time elevating your effectiveness and authenticity with your communication. With authentic communication, it means that you are not letting your ego get in the way. So just because you've been promoted to a senior role, are you all of a sudden going to talk in a different manner to your colleagues, or are you all of a sudden not going to talk to them and have lunch with them? No, you're not. So you need to elevate and work hard on those, those areas that we spoke about in the webinar.
Okay, and I think, look, you're going back to the authenticity is key, and I think when you look at communication these days, I think that social interaction, the different generations as well that you're dealing with, and personality styles. And so for me, how do you adapt to, I think people maybe wear the disc profile and the personalities. How do you, using that, what would your advice be on with communications to individuals around that?
Okay, so that's another common thing that people say to me, and that's something that we really do a deep dive with. How do we adapt? What are the different types of communication styles we have? So I would usually, because it's only quite simple, I use the yours Bender one, where we have 4 types of communication styles. So we have the analytical. So we have 3 brains, by the way, in our bodies: head, heart, and gut one. So your analytical communicator, it's facts and figures. That's what they're looking for. They might come across an expressor in their communication style. An expressor likes time, they're full of energy, they're quite creative. Now, if they go into a meeting with an analytical communicator and they go gushing in with all this energy and creativity and start to talk what's happening and what the updates are, and the analytical communicator is actually looking for facts, figures, the latest report, all of a sudden you're going to come into a bit of a clash. So we do need to be agile, absolutely, and be able to adapt to whatever communication that style is. I've had to do that myself, actually, a lot with a former CEO of what I worked with. Initially, I was a bit miffed, and I was like, what's going on here? But then I began to understand that I needed to be agile, I needed to adapt my style. So I would start off with his type or her type, and then I was able to bring in the element, and they were absolutely fine with that. There's a great deep dive with that, Dave, where we explore further during the course, but great question. Yeah,
I think it's good to see you bring it in the neuroscience piece as well. So, it's another layer of information and analysis that you can use and bring to the approaches. So look, yeah, I think just conscious of time, and I think we've covered all the questions there, most of the questions. So look, appreciate everyone who's posted them, and hopefully you've got some really relevant information you can take away for yourselves personally, and also even for your teams and the wider business. As we've alluded to earlier, we do have a program upcoming in July. So it's 2 days, it's done online. So we'll be definitely able to work around the non-verbal cues, etc. And it's on July 4th and 3rd and 4th. And there is a discount for any attendees on the webinar today if you're interested. So you can contact any of the sales team here at the Irish Times Training. And finally, before we finish, so this, as I alluded earlier, is the 3rd session we've done. We've covered change management, coaching, and I suppose we're talking about communication today, but the next up is the power to be digital ready. I think we're all grappling with digital at the moment, and what it means for us from a personal perspective, but also from a business and the implications. So we have Garvin Callan's going to do a session on that in September. We take a little break over the summer, and we'll kick back in with the power to be digital. So hopefully you can go online and again register for that. Please let other colleagues know or connections you have in your network. It'll be again another deep dive into the area of digital, which is evolving constantly. So and look, on behalf of the team and Jill, all I want to do is thank you for joining us today. Hope you got the information you needed and takeaways and tools and approaches that you can use within the world of communication. We will be sending on a recording of the session after, so you can again just recap on some of the key messages and insights, and enjoy the session, as we say. So other than that, look, thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon and take care. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. A pleasure.